Hey everyone, this is Ian Carlin. Welcome to the Empty Cup Podcast. With me today, by way of Google Hangouts, is David Whitehead, and you might know him from his YouTube channel, or his podcast, or his website, by that matter, called Way of the Truth Warrior. And I've recently stumbled onto David and his channel, and I've just been devouring it. So, hey, thanks, David, for coming on the show.
Hey, Ian, thanks for having me on, man. And hello to all of your listeners. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I was really excited that you agreed. And, sometimes it takes people like a week to respond or something like that, but you like responded right away. Like I was like, wow, holy smokes.
Well, you
It was
got
really
lucky. You caught
amazing.
me at work and I was right in front of my computer and I saw the message pop up. So I checked you out. I always do some background checks. And right away I was like, oh, this guy's totally into the stuff I'm into. So it'd be a pleasure to come on and have a conversation with you.
Right, right. Well, and just from what I've heard from some of your martial arts training and your background, which we'll get into just a moment, we have a lot of similarities in the fact that the tagline for this channel is that this is the podcast in which traditional and modern martial arts collide, and we dissect what's left over. And we're going to do that today as well. We're just going to have a conversation about martial arts and philosophy of martial arts. But before we do that and get into the kind of meat of your channel and what it is that's your passion for what you do at your channel, I like to get into the background of all my guests. So tell us a little bit about your journey in the martial arts. How old were you when you started? What styles of martial arts you learned, and that kind of thing. So go ahead and help us out here.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up always having a fascination with the martial arts. I was interested in it probably by the age of 7. I'd watched, the typical Ninja Turtle programs and caught some Karate Kid here and there and some various comic books and things like that. And then I also had some friends that had trained in styles like karate and taekwondo in my neighborhood. And I was always begging my parents, can I go do that? I think that would be awesome to do. And they were in the opinion of, well, maybe it's a little too violent. Maybe, it wouldn't be a good thing. They were meaning well. And like many parents that might not be fully educated on what the martial arts are really all about, they were just trying to protect me, right? Which is normal. So
Right.
around the age of 9, I went to the library. I kind of went and snuck into the history section of the library and started just pulling books off the shelf and they were about history, the history of different cultures and things like that. And then I wandered over to the sports section and there was always martial art books there. And I came across Bruce Lee's stuff first, right off the bat, the Tao of Chi Kung Do and Striking Thoughts and some of these other great books. And then I found some other just awesome books on, there was techniques that were shown in the books. And I was the kind of kid that would take those books home. And when my parents weren't around, I'd go out in the backyard and practice my front kicks and just practice techniques on my own. But I also was really fascinated with the back sections of those books where they were discussing the philosophy of martial arts and of warriorship and what it meant to follow a sort of warrior lifestyle. And that was always really fascinating to me. And it must have appealed to me at that age because I was a small, scrawny kid. I wasn't like not unpopular in my peers or anything like that, but I just kind of always felt like I was at a disadvantage. I wasn't the best at all the sports we used to play. And so what I saw, like these rather unassuming people at martial art tournaments or training pictures and videos and things like that, I was always just blown away by their level of confidence. The fact that they walked with this air of it wasn't an arrogance. It was just like a calm, humble sense of confidence. And that really I was just like, I gotta do this. I gotta learn this. And I was under the impression at that time that you couldn't just go and sign up at a school. If you really wanted to learn the real thing, you had to go and find some sensei out in the woods somewhere in Japan, or you had to go and climb the mountains of Tibet and bring some scroll or something like that. But
You're really influenced by the movie aspect.
Yeah, because that's how I first saw it, right?
Right.
And then I got into a couple fights as a kid. These things happen. And so all of those experiences, I said, okay, I kept petitioning my parents. Eventually they gave in because I was doing crazy stuff, man. I was like going up on the garage roof and trying to do flying sidekicks off the thing. And like, eventually I went through the garage window and got my arm all cut up. And so my dad finally just said, all right, man, we'll put you in some karate. There's a karate school up the road. And a big shout out here to one of my first martial arts senseis, Wilf Miller from Yorkton. I was raised in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, up at the Yorkton karate school there. But I started there in karate, Shotokan karate. And I worked my way up, got very, very close to black belt. And it was my fault I didn't actually go and finish that exam. It's kind of, I had a girlfriend and kind of got lazy, and didn't really get right to that point. And then
And about how old were you when you finally talked your parents into that? I don't know if
so 9 years old, 9 or 10 would have been if they finally put me in.
Okay. Oh, so okay. All right. So you started showing an interest earlier than that, and it was by 9 or 10 that you started to actually take martial arts, huh?
That's right. That's right. And I was a dojo rat. I was there every single day. I walked myself there, walked myself home. I loved it. I competed in all the tournaments. I went to all the events, all the seminars. It was awesome. And then I probably around, so I left it at around maybe 16, 17. I kind of stopped doing karate. And I had moved to another city. And then I wanted to explore different styles. So I went and signed up at a boxing gym. And that was a rough few months in the beginning.
Yeah, that would get you some resistance training.
Oh yeah, and it's different, right? Like karate, you're mainly working with, your hands are lower, you're using your legs. It's a different style, right? So I go in a boxing ring and just got hammered for the first bit, and I was like, what's going on? And I remember this one of the boxing competitors that was there. He came up to me and he said, "All right, just glue this right hand to your face and just keep snapping the jab, because you have good timing, but your hands are down, you're getting slaughtered." So he told me, he made me box for like 3 months, and I was only allowed to use my jab for 3 months. Like all these guys were just going, and he just kept saying, just keep doing it, and you're going to get hit hard, but just work the jab, work the defense, and work your footwork. And by doing that, I learned boxing a lot quicker. And then the other strikes and everything started to flow a little bit better for me. And I was also really open to boxing. I love the Rocky films, of course, but I know Bruce Lee was somebody that had respect for boxing when he came over to America, and he spoke about it in a few of his writings. He was like, there was some really good things that he took from that. And so I went and did that. And at the same time, I was also training in ninjutsu. So up the road from the boxing school, there was an RCMP officer, because I live in Canada, that on his off hours was teaching ninjutsu. He was a ninjutsu black belt under Masaki in Japan, so it was legit. Okay. And so we went over there, and it was in some church basement, and we had to do turn the lights off and practice all the wrist locks in the dark and all that stuff. And it was just cool. Like the mysteriousness of ninjutsu was really what appealed to me. And then I eventually transitioned into Japanese jiu-jitsu and kickboxing. And I found my home there because there was a school in Ottawa. It's called 100% Martial Arts and Fitness. Shout out to all my friends and brothers and sisters there. It was everything in one place. So of course, Japanese jiu-jitsu is sort of one of the older forms of Japanese martial arts, from which you get karate, aikido, and judo. And so Japanese jiu-jitsu was the parent art of the samurai. So in that style, you learn a very wide range of skill sets, from weapons training to striking to judo to wrestling to grappling. And then I transitioned into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts. The kickboxing was huge. I trained under Bill Gatchell and Jean-Yves Thériault. Jean-Yves Thériault was my first kickboxing coach there, with as well as Steve Lorette, who are just fantastic kickboxers. But Jean-Yves Thériault, for those that might not know, he was a 23-time world kickboxing champion out of Montreal. He was world famous back in the 70s and 80s. And it'd been like the Superfoot Bill Wallace days, back in the day. And so I had the honor of training with him and many other great martial artists. And so what ended up happening, kind of a long story short, is that I would train in a lot of workshops and many different styles. And I did do some Jeet Kune Do workshops and really loved a lot of those concepts because of the Bruce Lee influence. But I sort of started developing a composite, sort of an eclectic way of looking at martial arts, where you're taking sort of the best of what really worked for my body, what my mind could process and really understand, and developing my own style. Because I'm really glad I had that influence from Bruce Lee in the beginning, where he was always about that. He was like, it's not just about the style, it's about the man, it's about the person that's doing it. And you should, as a martial artist, you should go through the basic ABCs, but eventually you have to learn how to develop your own unique style and take what is good for you and discard the rest. So I took that to heart. And I operated my own martial art facility for 8 years in Toronto. I
Okay,
achieved
cool.
my 3rd degree black belt in Japanese jiu-jitsu, black belt in kickboxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'm going for my purple belt soon. So yeah,
Yeah.
just kind of all over the map. And I'm a lifer, man. I'm going to be doing martial arts until I'm dead, man.
So just to get a time frame on this, can I ask how old you are, just so I kind of place this in history?
Sure. Yeah. I've been called the babyface assassin by my coaches because I got a young face, but I'm 35.
Okay.
I've got 2 beautiful daughters. I'm married, and I've been training martial arts since I was about 9 years old. So it's been a lifelong process. I feel like I'm an old martial artist because I've been just doing it with great passion for my whole life, and I plan on continuing that.
Well, yeah, and martial arts does kind of develop your character kind of more quickly. I noticed that too. And not that other sports or other activities couldn't do it, but because of the philosophy that is pressed in martial arts that you learn as you're becoming a martial artist, you kind of develop this wisdom that kind of takes you beyond your age. And I remember that when I was a kid. I remember people like, he's 14, but he's talking like he's 20. And then when I was 17, people thought I was like 23, 24. When I was 24, people thought I was like 35. Like, what is this? And a lot of that had to do, and I attribute a lot of that had to do with the content
Mm.
of what you're taught in martial arts and it comes out in a variety of different martial arts. It comes out, but it's almost across the board as far as all martial arts concerned. And I think this is the real reason, and that is because it's a combat art. It is a combat art. Even in more traditional styles that I would say have lost some of the combat aspects of it, um, there's still the combat mentality. You're still looking
Right.
at life as a way of competing, as a way of how am I going to do the best at this situation? And that carries over into your job and into your church and into whatever else that you're involved with. You're like, I don't want to, I don't want to um, be defeated,
Mm.
as in marriage. And I want to be not in a bad way, not like I'm, oh, I don't know
Right.
exactly what I'm saying. Kind of
Yep.
going off on a tangent here, but you know what I mean? You look at life
100%.
in that aspect, and that's part of what your channel is about.
Yes, it absolutely is. And thanks for bringing that up, Ian, because it's key. And this is what, if anybody's watching this show right now and they aren't involved in martial arts, or they're maybe looking into it and they're not sure, or they have children and they're kind of on the fence as to whether or not they should get them involved. What you just spoke about is important to bear in mind, is that this is about a way of living. And this is about a way of thinking and approaching the challenges of life. And we all are going to go through challenges in life. As much as our sort of modern society wants to offer all of these things that give us escapes from that, which I think is kind of making us a little bit dim and when it comes to our potential, right? When you're not faced with challenge, you don't really grow. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything in life grows through challenge. So the way the warrior concept and philosophy works, and from what I've gathered now researching many different warrior cultures across history, and every civilization has their version of it, that this is a way of developing courage and fortitude so that you can approach your internal struggle. We all have internal struggles that we're going through mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, right? And then how then the warrior faces the world and faces the
Mm-hmm.
challenges in life. And then that can also go all the way up the fractal to the socio-political world as well, and how good, strong, moral, ethical, grounded, confident people can make massive change in their communities and can make massive change in the world. And so for me, it's much bigger than just learning how to defend myself, although that's what I got it in for. And, getting in shape, to me, those are the secondary benefits of martial arts. And so you
Mm-hmm.
might start your journey thinking, oh, this will help my kid in school with some confidence, dealing with bullies, or this will help me get in shape and lose that belly fat, or this might give me the edge in a fight. Like this is where you start, and that's the white belt mentality. But
Yeah.
eventually you realize that that's the secondary benefit. The real benefit is that you're now given a philosophy for living, and you said it, there's something unique about martial arts. It's not because of the combative element, which turns people off. But I'll tell you why it turns people off. It doesn't turn people off because they're like, oh, it's violent and I'm against violence. Everybody knows that violence happens. What people want to avoid is a fight. And the reason people want to avoid a fight is because of the amount of challenge that they're going to face, not against whoever they're fighting, but against themselves. And if you ask any of the world champions, and I've interviewed many of them and spoken to them, and I've competed at a high level in my own right and been in real fights too, when you're in a conflict scenario, it brings out a totally different element of who you are. And you have to really rise to that occasion in a way that you don't have to rise on a soccer field or on a badminton court, or it's totally different. And I'm not here advocating fighting. I'm just telling you that this is sort of like a metaphor. Martial art training is a metaphor for those internal struggles that I was talking about. So it's much bigger than just those basic things.
It's a different struggle. You got to look inside, I think, a little bit more, and here's why. And I don't mean to bash like other arts or other sports or anything like that. That's not the point. But there is something extra special, in my opinion, about martial arts. So, you can learn discipline, you can learn life strategies from pushing a ball down the field. You can do that, absolutely. But when you have somebody trying to choke you, you learn it's a little bit different. You know what I mean? Yeah. The philosophy that you learn there, and the reality that you try to dig in to you internally about what is loss, what is gain. I'm struggling with myself. I'm struggling with this other person who's making me struggle with myself. It comes out, its expression is unique in martial arts, And
those people that you struggle with on the mats in a training facility, they're like your lifelong friends. Like there's a connection that exists between warriors that you can't even describe, right? Like everybody's like, you must really love fighting. I'm like, I don't get into fights. I don't go to the bar and get into fights. I haven't been in an actual street fight in years. It's like the longer I've trained martial arts, the less I've fought. Because you know what? I'd rather fight my friends. As funny as that sounds, I'd rather go fight my brothers. I'd rather go, because they're going to give me the best fight and they're going to have my well-being in mind. And we're there to sharpen each other. Iron sharpens iron, right? Like we're working together to become better. And yeah, to become better at our jiu-jitsu skills and our kicks and punches and all these things that we're working on. But we're also there to look out for each other, make sure you're living a healthy lifestyle. You keep each other in check when it comes to your diet and your training regimen. And even like I share deeply things about my own relationships and personal things with the people that I train with in martial arts, because there's a deeper understanding and connection there. Because you are making a physical connection with other human being in a totally different way than you would with the average person on the street, in the office, or whatever, right? It's completely unique.
You have to really find out what you're made of.
Absolutely.
And then that reality kind of goes, in my life, and I think it's true in every person's life, it bleeds into your overall reality. It shapes the way you think about your job, and it shapes the way you think about the projects that you do, and it shapes the way you think about all these other things that I think that, honestly, I really think that you only get when you're really struggling in that real personal, like you're saying, that intimate way, where one person's trying to hurt you and you're trying to hurt them in either this controlled manner,
right.
MMA or jiu-jitsu or hard sparring or, whatever that is. So,
and it doesn't even have to be hard sparring. I mean, like I did more of my hard sparring in the earlier days because you're preparing for actual fights and competitions, things like that. But these days for me, I'm a little more on the artistic end of it. I love the grappling element of Brazilian jiu-jitsu and wrestling and stuff like that, because of the fact that you have to now think on a completely different level. You can't just smash the groin, elbow the nose, punch the throat. You can't just do that. You have to use technique, skill, leverage, positioning. It's a science, right? And you're doing it against somebody that knows what you're doing. So you have to now think like 3 or 4 steps ahead. So it creates strategic thinking. It creates more objective thinking. It creates, it actually opens your mind and your creativity. You have to be creative in the way that you approach something like that. And you can grapple at 100% without hurting each other and leaving concussions and leaving all those kinds of things, And then when I do striking, like I like to do a lot of flow and a lot of like lighter touch movement, I love doing those types of sparring because you can, again, accomplish the same thing without demolishing somebody. So for anybody thinking about training martial arts, or if there are people that are training, my thoughts on the hard sparring is, if you're training for an actual fight and competition, you will have to do a certain amount of that in your training camp. But even professionals that I've spoken to, if you look at guys like Donald Cerrone now and so many guys, they don't even believe in the hard sparring anymore, just because they took so much damage in those hard sparring matches that they couldn't even perform as well as they wanted to in the fight. So they do a lot of technical positional sparring, light touch, but just flow, and just, because then you can hit the pads, you can hit the bag. So there's two schools of thought on it. But I would just say that for the average person, don't be intimidated by going into a martial arts school. And I know there are intimidating schools, and there are definitely a lot of schools that I would suggest maybe not to go into, right? But don't let those experiences turn you off, or your fear of getting into contact and all that turn you off. If you go to the right school with the right instructors and the right people, they will bring you up to that level, and you will start with the basics, and it will be safe, and it's about having fun, and it's about expressing yourself. And I hope that a lot of martial arts schools today are actually employing and teaching the philosophy of martial arts as well, not just here's how you kick a guy's ass in 30 seconds. Like, it should be more than that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And I didn't mean to overspeak when I talked about hard sparring or anything, or minimize the
Oh, no.
effectiveness of these light spars, because if anybody's listened to my channel for any amount of time, you know that I have this thing about getting hit in the head. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like it. As a result, I've developed some pretty fast hands because I don't like getting hit in the head, in the head, and I much prefer light sparring. But one thing that you said that I've said on the program before, and that is the jiu-jitsu training is something that you can go at pretty good, because you're not hitting, but you can still like I can still sit with somebody and they can restrain me, you know what I mean, with their strength and technique, and push me down, and I have to figure how to get out of this, right? Where if you can't do that every time with stand-up martial arts, you can't.
That's right.
If you did full contact every time you sparred, you'd be an idiot. You'd be punch drunk the rest of your life,
Right.
So so there is something about, and I call BJJ kind of the bullshit detector, because it kind of gives you a little bit of it, because when you have somebody who's resisting you, and then you can kind of extrapolate that to other areas. You're like, well, if somebody can really resist me right here where we're on the ground and we're not throwing punches, what's it going to be like when they resist me when I'm trying to, do a lock on them or a hold on them or something like that,
Yeah, it changes your thinking, because when I felt the same way. I feel like training the grappling arts has translated so well and given me so much feedback that I wouldn't have gotten if I didn't take those arts. Because a lot of what you do in, say, arts like Japanese jiu-jitsu and everything, I mean, we know it works to, break someone's finger or break their wrist or hit the throat or do those things. But a lot of it's theory in that you can't pressure test it. Whereas jiu-jitsu, you can, or the ground fighting, you can pressure test things, and then you can take the concepts that you're learning and apply them to the other areas of your game. So that's what I like about it, is that it gives you the perfect scientific lab scenario where you can go in and say, hey, I wonder if this concept will work. And then you learn how to be aware. And I always suggest to a lot of the hardcore, I only do Brazilian jiu-jitsu people, to, when you grapple, sometimes grapple with the awareness that that person might be carrying a knife or might try to punch you, or like, if you're sitting there in a berimbolo position, like, are you safe? Could you get out of that if they started hammer fisting you, like, so you do have to train your martial arts in the context of combat, for the importance of self-defense, for sure. But you should, explore other areas of martial arts. And that goes for everybody. I know people that are very traditional. They're like, no, karate is the only way, and I'm never going to go on the ground because I'm going to knock you out before we even get there. Well, sorry, all I got to do is slip that cross and double leg takedown, and that's all she wrote, right? You have no answer for that. So you need, and that's not being arrogant. That's just, this is facts we're talking about. You need, if you want to be a true martial artist, to open up your mind to look, at least studying what the other arts are bringing. And that's why it can be a lifelong study. Like when I did Japanese jiu-jitsu, you're kind of a jack of all trades, master of none in that discipline, because you learn so many different things. Where if you zeroed in on one element, like bow staff or Cali stick or joint locks or whatever, striking. You could spend your whole life just zoning in on that. And so what I did is I went and tried to find masters in those areas and ask them, you know, because that's what they focus their whole lives on. And then I take feedback from that and try to implement it in my game. And I know I'll never be as a proficient bowmaster as an actual bowmaster, but I know I will know a lot about it, and I will have a lot more variety to choose from. And that's my personality too. Like, I get bored just doing one thing. I love opening up and trying new things. Maybe next year I'll be doing Taekwondo or something. I don't know. I love the journey, because it's all about one thing that Bruce Lee said that always struck me really well. And I bring it into my philosophy on my show, is that all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge. So all the knowledge you're seeking and all the techniques you want to learn and all the world championships you want to win and all the things you're doing ultimately are not really about those things. It's ultimately a vehicle towards pointing back at the self, the true self, and helping you learn about your place in the world and where you're at in life and what your mission is and what your potential is and where your weaknesses are, etc. So everything we're doing is just a template. It's just a metaphor for coming back to you. And that's what I love so much about it.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Now, I have a technical question to ask you. Kind of touched on it a little bit, but it was something you brought up earlier, but I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about it. I've done a lot of different martial arts over my life. I'm 44 now. I've been doing martial arts since I was 7 years old. You know, I've done a lot of different, but one thing I've never done was Japanese jiu-jitsu. So, and this is just for my own curiosity. Tell me a little bit about, we'll get back to the philosophy stuff in just a second, but I wanted to know, because you're the first person that I've ever had on the program to talk about Japanese jiu-jitsu. What is Japanese jiu-jitsu? Like, how does it, I mean, I've seen videos and stuff, but how does it differ from like Brazilian jiu-jitsu and that kind of stuff? What is the technical art of it?
Well, it's a combat-based martial art. Okay. So, and actually Brazilian jiu-jitsu came from the Gracie families, you know, whatever, but they studied under Japanese masters. So what they did was they took the Japanese jiu-jitsu discipline and they started reshaping it to fit more of their mentality as a culture in Brazil, you know, their body types, their philosophies. And they found that there was a massive hole in the game of many martial artists, which was the takedowns in the ground game, right? So a lot of judo players, for example, which judo is also it's the sport version of Japanese jiu-jitsu, really. Jigoro Kano was the founder of judo, but he was a Japanese jiu-jitsu master as well, as was Morihei Ueshiba, who was the founder of Aikido. So
he was a Japanese jiu-jitsu guy.
That's right. And he did also, you know, in Japan, it was a cultural thing. Like when you went to school, you were learning these martial arts, and then you could decide to actually have careers and keep going. And then, so guys like Ueshiba and Jigoro Kano and Gichin Funakashi, you know, the founder of Shotokan Karate, they were focusing on different elements of what was brought back from the samurai period, right? So when the samurai period sort of came to an end, the samurai classes, and they had all this wealth of knowledge about combat and war and fighting, that they started becoming mercenaries, or they started teaching schools, that they just started teaching parts of it. And they were trying to find a way to be able to teach these arts to the general public, because obviously not everybody wants to do the true legit military training. That's very grueling. So they started shaping it into different factions in a way. And then the old story is just like in the Kung Fu tales, the same thing happened with Kung Fu, where you had different styles emerge, and then the masters of each style started arguing and fighting, and, you know, there was all this kind of stuff. But all that fighting and division started creating variations of martial arts, and it just started spreading. So the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was an element of that afterwards, and that they focused on the ground game and the grappling, because that was that was what you know, Helio was. And the Gracies that started it, they were very small, and they were competing in some of these big tournaments, and they saw that they're too small to just use strength against strength. So they took the elements of, you know, creating kazushi and imbalancing people, and then leverage and, you know, technique, and then they started modifying techniques to make it work in actual combat, right? So it was a process of modifying Japanese jiu-jitsu. So that being said, Japanese jiu-jitsu is a composite of essentially karate, judo, and aikido. So you're learning the striking style from karate, although the style I train under was a very progressive style. So it was much more modernized. It
Hmm.
was sort of a Kanryu system out of Canada, and it was built into its own style. But yeah, typically it's more of a Japanese karate style of striking mixed with the Aikido elements of the joint locks, the wrist locks, the movement, like the circular movements of Aikido are very much a part of it. Judo is involved in there. So typically the takedowns that you're training in Japanese jiu-jitsu, even in the self-defense aspect of it, like someone grabs you in a bear hug or they grab you in a chokehold, you're using judo throws to take somebody down. Whereas
Right.
in Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournaments, it's great to learn judo, but because a lot of times the Brazilian jiu-jitsu players get really low and judo players are typically very upright, the jiu-jitsu community has really been implementing more wrestling. So the
Hmm.
wrestling, the Greco-Roman and the American wrestling has really made a huge splash in Brazilian jiu-jitsu because it just, you know, it was just a little bit different for the style. And they get low because
Yeah,
they don't want you jumping guard on them. So you can see how it's changed in the arts, but the foundation was judo, aikido, and karate.
I got you.
And then there's many
So it's
different
kind of like
styles
if
of that.
somebody kind of like this is these styles kind of broke off of Japanese jiu-jitsu and they took one element of it
That's right.
and and went with it, you know.
It's the
So
parent art. It's the parent
yeah,
art coming out of Japan, out of the Japanese system, right?
gotcha. I always
Um,
wanted to know. I always want to
yeah.
know. Is this a style that I hadn't been terribly familiar with? Of course, a cursory because you're into martial arts, you kind of hear lots of different stuff, but it was nothing I've ever sat down and specifically studied. So I'm glad you're on the program to help me with that. You know, the listeners like it, they like it. If they don't, you know, whatever. But
Yeah, well, it's
I mean,
good. I mean, it's funny that it's sad that to me a lot of Japanese jiu-jitsu guys get a rap today because of the popularity of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And if you have Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys listening, they'll typically go like, Japanese jiu-jitsu. Like they don't really have the respect for it because if they just went and grappled a high-level Japanese jiu-jitsu guy, they have just been working on competitive gi grappling or whatever. And then that Japanese jiu-jitsu guy has been working so many different skill sets, even including kabuto, which is like weapon
mhm,
training, right? So they look at it like, oh, they're not learning real jiu-jitsu. But that's not the truth. What you are in Brazilian jiu-jitsu today in the competitive world, although Hicks
mhm,
and Gracie would actually agree with me on we should be going back to the roots of self-defense and community growth and all that, not so
right.
much on these competitive styles. But that aside, the Japanese jiu-jitsu guy is restricted in that confrontation in so many different ways. Like you can't do wrist locks, you can't do finger locks, you can't tiger knuckle strike the guy in the throat, you can't pull out a Kali stick and start whipping it around. You can't. There's so many things you'd be restricted on in a competition that probably more than half of your material is completely gone. So that's why, and I also advise people on the Japanese jiu-jitsu side, don't be closed-minded. Work your grappling. I mean, we do grappling. I would say
Everybody needs.
a black belt Japanese jiu-jitsu grappling would probably be around a blue belt Brazilian jiu-jitsu level, right? So you learn enough grappling because in Japanese jiu-jitsu, because it's a field art, a combat art, you're not hanging out on the ground for 3 5-minute rounds or whatever. You kill the guy, you get to the ground, you kill the guy, you get back up again. Like you're trying to deal with multiple attackers. Like my black belt exam, they'd blindfold us and surround you with black belts and you'd be getting attacked from all angles. Like it's totally different than just getting there and rolling a guy.
Right,
So
right.
I have great respect for both arts. I'm actually focusing right now for the next few years on specifically the grappling component. But I think both
Yeah, me
sides
too.
should hear each other out and we shouldn't be so like religious about it.
Well, that's what happens, and you know, it's like you have the Reformation, and then you have the isolation of that Reformation to become a new thing that needs to be reformed from. You know,
Right.
it's I don't know if you're familiar with Protestant history at all, but that's kind of
Mm.
like how I mean I've seen this over and over in Protestant history, where it's just like you have this new movement that said no to this, and we're going to do it a different way because of these problems,
Right.
and then they come, but then suddenly that becomes this frozen issue. You know, that becomes like then this becomes the standard, and now we're just as closed-minded and not open to the conversation as the people previous. But the problem
It's a
we
good
had with the
point,
people
and it happens.
previous
It
is
happens in religion. It happens in martial arts. It's an element of human affairs. Like in Christianity alone, there's over 60,000 different registered denominations of Christianity that all
right,
disagree
right.
with each other. So the same
Well, I
thing.
see. I've seen
could
this
be happening
happen.
in martial arts as well, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've seen this happen just in my own life. That's the crazy part. This is not something that I have to look back years, before I was born to see. We had this group of people called the Gracies dominate,
Hmm.
and people went, "Whoa, what the heck? We need to learn this." And then people learned that and said, "This is great. This is awesome." There's these holes in martial arts that they weren't expecting, and we learned to exploit those holes. And now, not all of them, but there is a staggering number of them who are saying things like, "Oh, you can't do 10th planet jujitsu. That's not true
Yeah,
jujitsu."
exactly. Oh my
It's just like
gosh.
I've seen this now. It's like, wait a minute, what they're doing is exactly what you did, and instead of now being open, what you're accusing these karate people of not being open to, now you're not being
You've
open.
become what you hate, right? Isn't this
Yeah, right.
the human tragedy? Yeah, it's true. And you know what's funny? That's happening because the philosophy of martial arts and the history of martial arts is not being taught and it's not being focused on. Like when I
Okay.
started in karate, you had the dojo kun, right? The rules of the dojo, the ethics that were laid out, you know. You go to taekwondo schools, they're huge into this. You get in there and they have the kids like chanting, like these are the ethics that we have to follow as martial artists. We are warriors. We're here to make a better world. And sadly, when you go to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, like there's a loss of that. And even MMA schools, like it, because it's just about fighting. So it attracts people that are only want to go in there and just learn the best way to kick somebody's ass. And that's fine. And that's fun and great. But why not also integrate into your life, whether it's in your gym or whether you're just listening to podcasts like this and doing your own independent research? Why not integrate the philosophy? Because if you do, what's going to happen is you're going to become a whole-brained person, and you're going to become an open-minded person as well. So you're not going to be so closed-minded and so fixed on defending your position all the time. Why are we defend? I think that happens in
Right.
martial arts. We're learning self-defense, so we get very defensive all the time. Whereas I
Right.
think it
Right.
should be much more open and say, you know, well, this is why everybody hated Bruce Lee in his day. All the martial artists, you should have seen, like, he's popular now and everybody loves him now and talks about him now. But during his time, he was hated in China and he was hated in America because of the
Yeah.
fact that he was talking about, he was so unorthodox, and he was like, no, forget fixed stances, forget gis and belts, forget just doing one thing all the time, forget about, there's no styles. He's like, I don't believe in styles. Man, did that ever piss everybody off. But
Right.
today
Right.
that's looked at as popular culture now. Like there's memes of Bruce Lee and t-shirts of Bruce Lee. So let's take those little bits of wisdom from even one guy, and there were many greats too, he wasn't the only one, and say, we could rebuild martial arts from the inside out. We could make it even better than what it is. We're not restricting anybody. If you love Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or you love boxing, or you love wrestling, or you love MMA, love it, go for it. But look at us as brothers and friends. We all want the same thing. I just love Japanese jiu-jitsu, and I love boxing. I love a little bit of everything. I'm not closed-minded at all, because
Right.
I've had my ass kicked by everybody. I've had my ass kicked by karate guys. I've had my ass kicked by boxers. I've had my ass kicked by jiu-jitsu guys. I've had my ass kicked by everybody. And any martial artist out there worth their salt, if you're not getting your ass kicked regularly, you're training in the wrong places. You need to have that humility and
That's a good
understand
one.
that everybody has something to bring you. You know what I mean?
Right, right. That's good. If you're not getting, I love that. If you're not getting your ass kicked regularly, then you're not training then you're training in the wrong places. Man, we got to put that on a T-shirt or something. We got to make that a
It
meme or
might be
something.
already, Ian. I don't know. If not, we'll make one.
Now you sound like you've had your kind of come to reality moment. Um, this what I would consider to be the JKD, as a lack of a better name, the JKD experience,
Mm.
although it was around long before JKD was. I mean, every style came from somewhere. You know what I mean? Even Wing Chun came from what some guy thought was the best of the five animal forms. So, everything came from somewhere. And somebody said, look, I like this, I don't like this, I like this, I don't like this. A lot of times that happens as a result of getting our asses kicked.
Mm.
Did you have that experience? Did you say, well, I was going to do Shotokan, but then I got my butt kicked, and then I got my butt kicked in boxing, and then I got taken to the ground, and then was that the fire that refined you to where you are today?
Yeah, I guess I could say I've had many of those experiences. And I also, I felt like I naturally always knew, because my first discipline was karate, as much as I loved it, and I still love it, I have a lot of respect for karate, just because I even love the katas. And everybody's like, oh, that's not practical in self-defense. You can't really break out a kata when someone's mugging you. Well, that's not what they're for. It's a kind of a yoga, right? It's like a physical meditation. Look at it like that. But I love it. But I realized there was limitations. I realized it because I did have a couple of times where I had a friend of mine who was studying boxing, and we would get together and do, like, hey, you want to do karate in the garage? We would do that, and we would get together, and I would have success with my legs, and he could never figure out how to get past my legs. When he did, I didn't have the answer for him that I thought I would, and I got mauled in that sparring match. I was like, whoa. And then it happened again because he had just kind of figured out how to crack my coat. And I was like, okay, I don't have a response. I don't have a way of getting him back to my range of fighting. Right. So I had, like I said, I've been watching, like I was a big fan of the Rocky movies. We used to watch them every Christmas. And I just love that. I love the boxing component for the fact that there's no way you're going to go in that ring and not get hit. Like, unless you're, some of the best boxers in the world, you're going to go in there and you're going to go through fire and hell for 12 rounds. And that brings out something in the human spirit that's totally different, So I love boxing for that hard, gritty, developing you into a fighter kind of thing. So I went into a boxing gym, and those first sparring matches just were like, okay, I absolutely need to master this. This is what I'm missing. And that's why I developed that. I also was physically attacked. I was physically attacked, and my life was threatened some years ago. I told this story in, was it my second podcast, where I told the story of getting jumped.
Multiple?
Yeah.
Dude, I listened to that. That was the first one that I listened to of yours. And I was riveted. I was like,
oh, really?
To the set. Yes, I was. I was going to ask you to tell that story here, because, like, seriously, like, I turned that on, and like the way you tell it and just the way you go through it, it's so smooth. And not to put you on the spot now or anything, but quite honestly, that was just like, I mean, it's just like watching a TV show that you couldn't take your eyes off. I was literally like,
oh wow,
I've got to hear what happens next. I have to hear. So please, if you don't mind going into that and some of the lessons you learned out of that, I would love for my listeners to hear that.
Sure. Well, they can get the full rundown on my show, but I'll give you the synopsis of it. Where I was working night shift in Ottawa, and so my schedule was a little bit different. And I was living in kind of a rough neighborhood. Anybody in Ottawa, the Bay Shore area, if you know, I don't know what it's like now, but you know what it was like back then. A lot of gangs and things like that. And but I was out late one night. I was on my way I was just kind of walking around. I went to the corner store. Telling the story, I grabbed a can of Pepsi from the store. I don't drink pop anymore, by the way, but I was drinking it back then. And I walk out of the store, and across the street from the store was the movie theater. I'm a big movie guy. And I was thinking, maybe this weekend, a couple of buddies and I will go check out this new film. I don't know what it was back then, but I want to check it out. Let's go see the time. So I'm looking up on the board, and it's probably around 12:30 at night. And the theater, all theaters, they're right on a main street, right? But they're so huge that if you're walking around the side of them, you can kind of get into the dark shadows and the areas where who knows, right? So I'm walking past, and I'm looking at this sign. I'm checking out the film, and I'm like, okay, cool. I'm walking, and I was on my way to go to this place where there was a gap in a fence. There were two fences where it shaved like 10 minutes off my walk to get back to my place if I were to take this place. And I'd been taking this for like 3 months. The time that I lived there, I've been taking this little nook that I could squeeze through. And I was on my way to that, and I noticed there were 6 guys just walking. And then they kind of noticed me, and I'm walking, and they start changing their direction to start walking towards me. And they kind of looked like hoodlums, but I didn't want to judge. And I was just like, okay. And so I start walking a little faster, and then they come up, and they're pretty close, and they're like, hey man, you got a smoke? We bum a smoke off you? And I'm like, sorry guys, I don't smoke. I don't have any smokes. So they're like, okay. So I just start walking. I turn around, and I start hearing running on the pavement coming up behind me. And it just I just knew, like the hair on my neck stood up, and I'm like, this is not good. I get spun around, and I see because I was on the side of the theater getting close to this fence. So it was dark, but there were still some of the street lamps there. And I just see a reflection in this guy's hand. And he had some brass knuckles or some rings. I'm pretty sure they confirmed it was brass knuckles because they found them on the ground later. But he spun me around and smashed me. And I started leaning out of the way of the shot. So I didn't take the full brunt of the shot, but it really clipped me hard, and it cut under my eye, and some blood actually shot right into my eye. So for a moment I was like, whoa, like it hit me like a lightning bolt. And they surround me. And I remembered my boxing training. And it's like, put your hands up. And I was also training kickboxing at the time. So it was like a Rocky moment where you got like Mickey, like, put your hands up, and it's just like, get your hands up. So I get my hands up. And the minute I put my hands up, the guy's like, oh, you want to do some karate shit with me? Like, and I'm sitting there going, listen, I'll fight you guys one at a time. I'll stay here all night if I have to. But if you're going to jump me and you're going to surround me and you're going to attack me all at once, then you guys are a bunch of cowards. And I probably shouldn't have said that, but I did. And so they don't have anything of it. They just kind of give me a little smirk. They start pushing me around. They start throwing shots. And something pops into my head from a workshop that I did. I didn't even train this regularly. It was just a workshop that I did where there's a principle called herding that you can do, where when you have multiple attackers coming in, the last thing you want to do is be in the center of it. Like in all the movies, the guy just kind of waits for everybody to surround them, and then he just like Jackie Chan kicks everybody. That's not a good strategy. So the idea is to kind of you identify who the leader is, and the leader of the attack is always going to be the one talking to you, posturing in front of you. You kind of get this feeling that the gang is following this leader, right? So you identify that. You either take that guy out as fast as you possibly can and make a quick example of him, or if you can't do that, the idea is to start herding and moving in a sort of either an S pattern or a circular pattern where you've got your hands in front, you're in a good position, and you're just moving so that they can't all get behind you. So it just kind of kicked in, and I just started doing that. And I was just kind of pushing with my hands and pushing with my feet and just trying to keep space and try to talk to them and try to tell them to screw off and all that. And then there was a couple shots thrown. I may have landed something. I don't remember in this moment, but something instigated them to say, let's get the shank, or let's get the knife, or the screwdriver. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was they said. Let's get the knife, let's just say, right? And I'm like, oh my God. And they're like, we're going to screw this guy up, right? So I'm really desperate at this moment. And I remember all the adrenaline kind of like hitting me at once. My knees start feeling watery. I start feeling like the butterflies. I start feeling weak almost for a second, because what's happening is your body is pushing all the blood really fast to your extremities. It's just a natural instinctive response. It's your fight or flight response that kicks in and just kind of like, and if you don't take a few moments to breathe, your mind is going at like 1,000,000 miles a second, and it's trying to process everything at once. And you need to, in martial arts, you need to learn how to focus in and be calm in that moment. It's extremely hard when someone's telling you they're going to kill you. So I'm trying to deal with this and create space. And then it clicks into me. I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to keep moving towards, I'll keep this going, and I'll just keep moving towards that gap in the fence. Because if I can slip through that gap, I can zip out and I'm gone. They got to go through single file. There's no way they're going to be able to catch me. So I start moving towards the fence. And as I back up, I feel on my hands, on my back, it's like clink. There's a fence there. There's a chain link fence there. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, I used this thing the day before. I used this gap the day before. That day, the day I was jumped, construction guys had come, I guess the city, whatever, they're coming, we've got to patch that hole. They put a chain link fence in front of that gap.
So I'm like,
there goes my exit. And now I'm backed up against the fence.
Oh no.
And so I start moving away from the fence. There's still commotion happening. And this is all happening pretty quick. Okay. There's still commotion happening. I start to see that all of a sudden there's only 5 guys now. And I don't know how I remembered that. I don't know how I was able to see that, but I'm like, there's only 5. Where's the other guy? I'm trying to track everybody. And I start to notice that the guy in front starts getting in almost like a wrestling position. So he's getting ready to lunge into me. And I could just see his face. He was almost like licking his lips, like, I'm going to get this guy, right? And I'm like, oh crap. and I just glance over my shoulder. Something in my head just said, you know, clear your back, or, you know, look behind you. I look behind me and I see a guy kind of like sneaking behind me, and I see him pull out something that starts to, it's lighting up in the light. It's a knife or something, right?
Yeah.
So I just put it together. This guy's going to spear me into that guy, and boom, that's it. I'm a moment away from not being here anymore. So I just, as the guy starts to plow in or to shoot into me, I fire a clean left hook. Like it was just something we had practiced a few times, of like intercepting somebody as they're moving in and clipping them, right? That's usually when you knock people out, is while they're attacking you, right?
Yeah.
So the guy comes in, I clean right through his chin. It didn't knock him out, but it sent him down. And then I fired a quick back kick at the dude with the knife. And I didn't kick him. I didn't land it. Would have been nice, but I didn't. But it made him jump back just for a second. It was just like a moment of hesitation. And then I dove. It was kind of, I felt like I was on a bit of an incline on the hill that was leading up to the fence. And I dove off that into the other. I just kind of splashed into the other 4 guys. Mm-hmm. And it was just kind of a scrap from there. And then I got up. I got my hands up. And right at that moment, right when they were kind of regathering themselves to come back in, a security guard walks out of the theater. And he didn't see what was happening right at that moment, but everybody kind of heard the door slam and the guy walk out in a walkie-talkie. So the guys just kind of starts backing away. And there was this really weird moment where we all just kind of like stop scrapping and moving away from each other very slowly. And then they're walking, and I'm just like, okay, I'm breathing heavy. I'm trying to process all this. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not dead yet. Thank you. And then I lost it. There was like a button, a switch that just went. I saw red. I freak out and I just start screaming all kinds of stuff at these guys. I'm freaking out and I start running after them as they clear. So it was a combination of that and the security guard, and they start running. The security guard sees us at this point. He comes over. They're jumping over the fence. I'm jumping over the fence, and I'm just walking through the alleyways and the parking lots, just like screaming for these guys, trying to find them. Security guard catches up with me. He's like, oh my God, my face was swollen out to here at this point. And he's like, okay, let's call the paramedics. Let's call the cops. He calls the cops. Luckily, there was a cop car really close. So like 2 minutes later, the cop car pulls up. He brings us in the back of the car. He's like, what happened? I tell him the story. And we see the dudes over in a basketball court in one of the playgrounds in the area. So the cop goes, okay, so I'm going to go this way. Security guard's going that way. And he looks at me. He's like, you're going to go that way. So he kind of recruits me.
Recruits you into this whole thing, right?
It's not police procedure, okay? I don't think they usually do this, but I was like, all right, I'll help you out. So we get out of the car. We try to surround them. They sprint off. We're looking through all the parking lots and everything, and those bastards got away, unfortunately. We were able to subdue them. And the sad thing is that when the paramedics came and I was in the back of the ambulance and they were just checking me out, they said that I was like the 5th guy they had to come and take out of there this past week. There had been events called swarmings in Ottawa, where big groups of gangs were just jumping people, even in broad daylight on public buses and movie theaters. It was just crazy. And apparently the same gang had been identified in the area, jumping some teenage girl and beating her to a pulp and taking like the $20 out of her purse and her shoes. And they got away as well. So in that moment, you talk about moments that change your life. First of all, I was glad to be safe. I was glad to be alive. All I had was like, I only got hit twice in the whole thing. My arms were a bit bruised because I took most of the shots in the arms, and I felt like I came out okay. But I've never been the same since that. I went around for an entire year with almost like a bit of paranoia of just always, I hear noises behind me and I jump, even to this day a little bit, and you realize how quickly things can happen. And it's what I'm grateful for is that I was able to stay composed. So all the technical martial art moves aside, one thing that you will learn and get good at by just training, I don't care what art you're training, is you're developing an awareness that the average person is not going to have. And you're developing a very important skill, which is how to manage stress under pressure and being under fire. And so I realized in that moment, if we're talking about real combat, I had better train every possible style and every possible way in order to be able to be effective in that situation. And I hope it doesn't ever happen again. But I just want to know that if that ever does happen, I know how to do that. And then I have the ability to teach my daughters how to do that and to teach other people how to do that. So that's a long
Right.
story short.
No, that's an incredible story. It's just a great story. Oh man. I don't even know where to go from there, man. That's such a good story. It's like, wow, what do you say after that? You talked a little bit about wanting to become Batman after that. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's some revenge thought, the kind of,
Oh,
justice, underground justice, retribution type of thoughts that come to your mind whenever you go through a situation like that. Just hearing that made me want to be Batman.
yeah. You
Like,
almost wish, like you wish you could just go out there and clean up the streets, and, I've spoken to a lot of police officers, and, there's a lot of good ones out there, a lot of bad ones too, unfortunately, but there's a lot of good people trying to help. And, even they're stuck in a lot of red tape. Like they know exactly where criminals are, but there's all kinds of procedures and things and like this. And so, you kind of wonder sometimes, and it really got to me that we didn't catch them, and that these guys, not only had they done it before, but they were out there free doing it again, and they didn't care, and they didn't have any empathy, and they didn't
did you
have obviously an
did you
upbringing where they were shown philosophy and morals and ethics and learning how to access their potential. So they found their way into gang culture, which is just everywhere today. And so I feel for young people. So I said, okay, well, if I can't be Batman and I can't just go out and clean up the streets, then what I could do is make a very concerted effort to keep educating myself and to keep teaching martial arts and to keep training it, and then to communicate it. And that's one of the things I'm doing in my show. And I don't just talk about martial arts in my show. I talk about a lot of other philosophy and even politics and spiritual concepts and things like that. But the main focus is about the self-knowledge that everybody needs, so that they're not operating from sort of the dark side of the force, if you will. They're not operating from the shadow part of themselves. They're learning how to transcend that and become a holistic, effective, moral, confident, and competent human being. And that's what we need to encourage in the schools. I wish martial arts were taught in this way in schools. In Japan, in other cultures, it's integrated in their system. You can even get degrees. You can go to like a university, and like what the judoka in Japan that compete at the Olympics, there's a university there, and they have the best facilities and instructors to teach them. It's amazing, So I'm in Canada, and it would be nice to see more of an effort to bring these things out, because it's, there needs to be an outlet for people, for aggression, for frustration, for this thing that human beings, fighting is part of our nature. You can't get out of that. And
can't
in
get out of it?
Western culture, the concept was that we would have a way of argumentation and debate in order to settle issues, instead of like some of the more, I guess you'd call them primitive cultures, that were just like, well, we'll just kill everybody if they don't agree with us. We were trying to develop a system here that was all about fairness and justice and everything else. But that system's not going to work if you just have this authoritarian legal system with all this red tape in it. You need to have the people that make up society educated and motivated to understand what justice really is, what morals really are, where these things come from. And in the warrior traditions, it's all right there. These were the guys that were on the front lines defending their villages and their countries. They were the ones that developed these philosophies in a totally different way than the guys just sitting in some room somewhere writing philosophy down could ever conceive of. Because these warriors were faced with life and death. They were faced with reality every day. And so they had a very unique concept. And that's why we started this show talking about how martial arts is very unique from other sports. Not to diss those sports, they're great too. But there is a very unique quality of it. So even if you're listening to the show and you maybe don't want to go do the training, you should at the very least pick up some books. And I have many references on my site, which will be up very soon, and I'm sure you do too, Ian, of where to go and read about these things, to learn these concepts, because it's crucial.
Yeah, it's very crucial. And, there's something to be said about that warrior attitude and spirit and demeanor, because that's something that's been with me for a long time. It's that, and it's carried over into so many other areas of life, about that, this is going to be challenging to do this.
Mm.
But it's that iconic samurai that stands at the front of his village, or the guy that stands at the front of his village, the monk that stands at the front of the monastery, who says like, okay, look, this is going to be difficult to do, but I know what it's like to face challenge, and to face challenge that seems like it can't be overcome, and to come out on the other side. And
Right.
so I can, that's such a part of at least my worldview that has shaped me. And martial arts, it goes beyond just what happens in the studio. It goes to, how am I going to handle this argument that I might be having with my wife or my boss or
Yeah.
whatever? Am I going to stand up for what's right when I see somebody, being pushed around at the store, or somebody being taken advantage of?
Right.
Am I going to be that warrior that steps up to the plate and says, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing no matter what the cost?
That's
I,
right.
and it's the martial arts that I feel has given me that, and I've never lived it perfectly, of course, but it's given me that at least
Neither have
that
I.
fortitude, that at least that initial fortitude to say, hey, I'm going to stand up and do the right thing. I don't fight for the sake of fighting. People who fight for the sake of fighting, they turn on their friends
That's
and
it.
their family when the battle's over. You know what I mean? They have this expression in Christianity where just like you want somebody strong at the top of the sheep pen,
Yeah.
but you don't want somebody who loves to fight, because when there's no wolves around, those people start attacking the sheep
That's right.
because
Yeah.
they just love to fight. That's not what we're saying. The warrior stands at the top of the sheepfold and defends the sheep against the wolves and the bears, because it's the right thing to do.
That's right. And that what you're saying is important. And it's also, it continues past that too, into, environmental defense and getting involved in your community, and even maybe at the political level, and even in just everywhere you can. I feel like that warrior spirit, there are people that have it, whether they're physical warriors or not. You can be a spiritual warrior. You can be a mental warrior. You can be a warrior in your life for yourself, your friends, and your family. But then what happens is that circle starts to grow, because we're all connected to networks of people. And I feel like this kind of philosophy can inspire great change in our society today. And we can rescue a lot of these kids that are getting sucked into gangs and sucked into criminal behavior and into all of this darkness, by showing them the light, by showing them there's a better way. I know what you're deficient in. I understand what you're going through. Let's have a conversation about it, and let me help you in the same way that I got, because I was younger. One of the things that happened to me was I was very close to getting involved with some pretty bad crowds. And martial arts was one of those things that kept me centered and gave me a moral center to say, you know what? I'm not going to go to that level. I don't need to be popular that much that I'm willing to give up my humanity to do it. So I'm moving away from that. And I'm so glad that I did. And we can help educate children and also adults, man. We need a reminder too. Holy crap, you got a lot of crazies running around. I mean, look what just happened in Las Vegas, for crying out loud, and what's happening around the world, So you expand your vision and you realize that the warrior desperately needs to return. And I'm talking about the true warrior here, not just some person holding a gun and fighting for some corporation somewhere. I'm talking about like a real warrior that understands these principles. And those principles need to be taught to our police, to our military. And they are to some extent, but it needs to be more. And that way we have more, like you said, the guardian wolf, or the guardian soldier that's there, that's not going to bite the sheep, that's there to actually do the job, to protect and to serve. That can only happen when philosophy and morality is understood, and the real concepts of justice that are all the way through the warrior tradition are understood.
Yes, yes, well said. Thank you. We're about ready to wrap up the program. I want to ask you the final question that I ask all my guests, and that is, what are your top three? We can even, mold this to what we're saying. If somebody came to you and said, David, what are your top three pieces of advice for becoming the warrior? What would you say?
Well, I would say, first of all, you should study a form of martial art that appeals to you. And I highly recommend training physically. I believe in the body. I believe in body intelligence. It's very important. There's been even research to show that it helps people with depression when they work with their body. So there's a body-mind connection that's there. So first, you definitely need to get involved with some kind of a martial art activity of some kind. Okay. And I'm not going to tell you what martial art it should be, because I believe that's a unique journey for everybody else. The second thing you need to do is start reading. Start reading a little bit every day. If you read 10 minutes a day, you could read probably 12 to 15 books a year. You know, you could get through, or maybe more than that. I think it's more than that. If you read 10 minutes a day, you can read a lot, and you can start to gain new perspectives. And don't just read fiction and stuff. That's great, but read some history, learn about what you're passionate about. And then the third thing is to connect to your why. Why? What is it that really gets you up in the morning, that gets you excited? Maybe you're stuck in a dead-end job. Maybe you're stuck in a dead-end relationship. Maybe you don't even have a job. Maybe you don't know where you should be going in life. Maybe you've always had these big dreams, but you've always been told, it's never going to happen. The reason it's not happening is because you're not connected to your purpose. You're not connected to the reason why you want to do that thing. If you wake up every day thinking, I want to make changes in my life, and I want to learn these new skills and all these things, but you don't have any template for that. The reason is because that why isn't strong enough. It starts with the desire. I didn't know the martial arts that I know now, and even the other skills of how to become an entrepreneur and how to become a good father and all. I didn't learn those skills overnight, but I did have a desire to learn. And with the desire to learn, you can learn anything, especially today. We have the information age right at our doorstep. You can go online, you can download entire courses, you can go and listen to podcasts like this. You can, so there is tons of information. Ignorance is not, it's a choice today, So if you're connected to the why of what you want, and then you are taking the steps daily, they don't have to be huge, giant steps. You don't have to become this thing you want to be overnight, but it's little incremental changes every single day. And I think that that's the most effective way to think about it and also to approach it. Because as for martial arts, you're going to get the big picture, but you're also going to get the small, realistic strategy picture of like, okay, it's enough to sit here and write a bunch of theory on a chalkboard and talk all philosophically, but unless I can prove it and factually get it, it's useless to me. So I have to practice. And the last thing I would say, if it was 4 things, be prepared to make mistakes and get comfortable at it. Actually, go and make as many mistakes as you possibly can. Next time you're training, next time you're grappling, next time you're go in there not being like, I'm going to crush everybody on the mat today. Go in there and just be like, I want to put myself in as many bad positions as possible. I want to put myself where I'm weak. I want to put myself, and I want to learn how to problem solve. If you think like that, even though you're going to take your licks and you're going to get maybe embarrassed sometimes, you are going to learn so much faster than those guys that just go in there and like, oh, I'm just going to crush today and I'm going to crush everybody in my path. Like, I just feel like that mindset overall is what's going to build you into what you want to be.
Right on. David, let people know where they can find you online.
Sure. I appreciate that. My website is wayofthetruthwarrior.com. If you're listening to this in the next 2 or 3 days, it won't be up because I'm switching over my platform. So, but it'll be available in the next week or 2. I'm just rebuilding it. But you can catch me on Facebook. Just look me up, David Whitehead. I also have a Way of the Truth Warrior page you can like, and I share all kinds of stuff in that page. I have a great community there. My show goes out on YouTube, on Podbean, and on iTunes. So you can find me on all of those platforms. Just look up Way of the Truth Warrior, and that's where you can find me.
All right, David, stick with me for just a second, okay? Because I want to talk to you when I close out the show. I'm going to go ahead and close out the show and just stay with me for just a minute.
And thanks for having me on.
Oh, man, it was my pleasure. Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Empty Cup Podcast. If you like what you heard, and you do me a favor, please share this on your favorite social media and get the word out there. Write us a review in iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, wherever you heard this. We're on all platforms. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Ronin JKD. And on Ronin JKD, I do what I call martial vlog. They're like little clippets. There's stuff that don't quite make it on the show where I evaluate systems. Like I just did one on katas. So if you're interested in hearing my take on katas, go ahead and listen to that. Also, You know, I do like fighting tips and stuff on there. There's some stuff on there of me doing some sparring matches, some rolling matches. So that's kind of like a bigger platform than just the Empty Cup podcast. Although the Empty Cup podcast is there, and you're also welcome to follow us on Facebook at Facebook.com/Empty Cup Podcast and Twitter at Empty Cup Podcast. And until we meet again, keep your gloves up.